Vince McMahon is synonymous with pro wrestling, and that's due to what he did behind the scenes, growing the WWE into this global brand. But I'm not here to talk about the greatness of Vince McMahon, the businessman, or the promoter. I'm going to talk about Vince McMahon, the on-screen character. Let's talk about his on-screen persona of Mr. McMahon. Now, a lot of people say this was Vince McMahon, the real person, turned up to 10. And if that's so, that's insane. Let's just think about this for a second. Mr. McMahon has left us with a ton of memorable moments that we're going to get into in just a minute. The earliest moment that I can think of, and that was when he made Trish Stratus bark like a dog on live television. This became one of the most infamous segments in wrestling history. And let's think about this too. That was like 8 months after WWE became a publicly traded company on the stock market. You have the billionaire, the head of the company, making a woman bark like a dog for a television segment. And I understand what Mr. McMahon wanted to do. I understand it. It was entertainment. Mr. McMahon got his comeuppance, Trish Stratus got her revenge on her evil boss, but stockholders and people alike and media alike did not agree with what Mr. McMahon had done. That was really where it started. But then, when you go to the Ruthless Aggression era, it just gets kicked up a notch to a whole other level. Mr. McMahon became insane. He became a menace. For me, these are some of the early memories that I have of watching wrestling as a child. Like, you look at some of the kids, like, from the generation above me. They were watching Stone Cold beat up bad guys, or they were watching Bret and Shawn have Iron Man matches. And then the new generation after me, they were watching CM Punk cut pipe bomb promos, or they're watching The Miz yell at Daniel Bryan on a WWE Network exclusive show. But for me, I was watching the Ruthless Aggression era. I was watching Eddie Guerrero with the Low Riders. I was watching The Undertaker battling Randy Orton. But most importantly, or most synonymously, I was watching Mr. McMahon run roughshod on WWE television. The things that Mr. McMahon did not do. He gave himself the raunchiest storylines. He wouldn't ask people to do something on TV that he wouldn't do. Like, you remember the Mr. McMahon Kiss My Ass Club? Yeah. He also kissed Rikishi's ass and had his head shoved up a Big Show's ass by his son-in-law and Shawn Michaels on pay-per-view. So Mr. McMahon was willing to do things that he asked from his employees. He was willing to do just about anything. Like, we've seen the video of him falling backwards, trying to teach Gronk how to, like, fall off a building, basically. Now, let's look at some of the things that made the Mr. McMahon character iconic. In 2006, Mr. McMahon thought it would be a good idea to feud with God and Shawn Michaels. This was on the heels of their WrestleMania match at WrestleMania 22, where Vince got his ass handed to him by Shawn. And then one way or another, Vince McMahon decides that Shawn is going to need God to help save him from the beating that Vince and Shane McMahon are going to put on him. And to make matters worse, Vince McMahon, he pronounced his own religion, McMahonism, that was going to go head to head with God. There's an iconic vignette where Mr. McMahon is walking through a church with Shane McMahon, and he's spitting holy water out like he's Triple H. He's asking God to strike him down. And you could tell by the way Shane backs away from Vince during this vignette that Shane was uncomfortable with it. And Shane is like, no, God, just take Vince. Don't take me too. And then they get to the match. They have this match at Backlash, this tag team match. Shawn Michaels and God versus Mr. McMahon and Shane McMahon. Mr. McMahon gives God an entrance. And God comes to the ring. It's like they have this like hokey lights and blue skies, and then they have a spotlight for God, and Mr. McMahon is telling God to dance in his house. And then he also, like, he took this McMahonism thing to a whole other level, and he started healing people. He started healing sick people like God did. Candice Michelle comes into his office with like a chest cold, and Mr. McMahon grabs her chest and starts healing her. In all honesty, he's one of the best on-screen characters in wrestling history. Then there was the period of 2007 where Mr. McMahon, I guess he wanted to get in with the hip-hop crowd. He started wearing a do-rag, It started talking like a thug, like John Cena, where he's literally walking up to John Cena going, "What up, G? What up, Holmes?" And he's saying stuff like, "I'm down with it." It was interesting to say the least. I mean, this is an old white billionaire. Like, this is like the definition of the 1% of the population of the world. And he's out there acting like I don't know, he's just acting like a buffoon. You know, he's acting like an idiot. He's trying to be something that he's not, and he just can't frankly ever identify with. And it was so ridiculous, and it was so entertaining. And I think he wanted to see what he could get away with. I would say, like, that's really a defining word for this era, is envelope pushing. Mr. McMahon was trying to see what boundary he could cross, what line he could cross before people would get too offended. And it's safe to say that people really didn't get that offended. When you think about it, in the long run, like, maybe there were some people complaining. Like, yeah, now in 2022, the vocal minority on Twitter would be so loud that none of the stuff that the Mr. McMahon character did would ever work today. There's just no way. Especially when he said the N-word on live TV to John Cena in front of Booker T. Like, that's something that he gets criticized for to this day on social media. And rightfully so. Like, yeah, that might have been too far, honestly. Like, that's probably one where he took it a little too far. But, I mean, for the most part, the stuff that Mr. McMahon did, like him healing Candice Michelle, and Candice Michelle just super cringely screaming, "Oh, Mr. McMahon!" Like, that's not really harmful to anyone. Him feuding with God, like, yeah, it may piss off a certain sector of the audience, but we never really heard from them. And I don't think people that were pissed off probably didn't really watch much of wrestling anyway before that they saw that segment. So I don't think it was that big of a deal, a lot of the things that Mr. McMahon did. And let's talk about this. He's probably the most memorable WWE ECW champion of all time. WWE ECW was not a good experiment. I mean, you had CM Punk running around as champion, John Morrison, guys like that. Mr. McMahon eventually had to take matters into his own hands and make himself ECW champion. And he did that to boost the ratings for WWE ECW. And then he was, like I said, walking around in a do-rag, running around as ECW champion. He was a big focal point of the show. He's like feuding with John Cena, Shawn Michaels, so on and so forth. He's winning matches over Bobby Lashley. It was really a moment in time that's unforgettable. It's something that was a big part of my childhood. And I just really wanted to pay a little homage to the Mr. McMahon character and what a menace he was throughout this time frame. But the Ruthless Aggression Mr. McMahon character will always hold a special place in my heart for the icon that it was. And that's it for this video, and I thank you all so much for checking it out. Peace. Viva la raza! I lie, I cheat, I steal. I lie, I cheat, I steal. Yo, mamacita, I got that passion that slaps along. Los mujeres fall in love with that Latin charm. One woman isn't enough, amigo. Siempre